Hi, Brian Lehrer here. Up next, Brian Lehrer Weekend. 3 of our favorite segments from the week packaged together for you to listen to on the weekend. So enjoy, and I'll see you back on the radio Monday at 10 a.m. on WNYC and WNYC.org. Brian Lehrer on WNYC. You know, President Trump said something yesterday that I wonder if Democrats will use in midterm election campaigns now. Asked if he thinks about Americans' financial situation when negotiating in Iran. In light of the war pushing up prices of gasoline and lots of other things, the president said this.
The only thing that matters when I'm talking about Iran, they can't have a nuclear weapon. I don't think about Americans' financial situation. I don't think about anybody. I think about one thing.
I don't think about Americans' financial situation, he said. Arguably not a good look, given the inflation that Trump's decision to fight this war is causing. You'll all have to decide for yourselves if the cost to your finances is worth whatever effects the war is having on Iran's nuclear program. And I imagine a lot of Republican candidates in the midterm elections will now be asked if they think about Americans' finances when deciding if this war is in their constituents' interest. With us now, someone whose whole job is to think about Americans' finances. We're delighted that Kai Ryssdal is joining us this morning. As many of you know, Kai hosts the public radio program Marketplace here on WNYC, weeknights at 6:30. We also air the Marketplace Morning Report during Morning Edition. Looking at the Marketplace website this morning, it says right there, you rely on Marketplace to explain how the economy affects everyday life. And Kai, in my opinion, and I never got to say this to him directly until now, does such an amazing job of explaining things like the inflation and other economic numbers that come out and humanizing the macroeconomics in his talks with actual humans. So, Kai, I'm a big listener to you at 6:30, and I know you're in LA, so thanks for getting up early to come on with us. Welcome to WNYC.
Absolutely happy to do it, Brian. So glad to be here.
Let me just jump right in on a question you've been asking a lot. Inflation from the war has many Americans' finances hurting, but the stock market seems unaffected and keeps hitting record highs. Can you explain at all why that's the case?
Yeah, so look, you're a listener, you know this, everybody who's listening to this knows this, the stock market is not the economy, right? There are things happening in the real economy that are not being reflected in the stock market. Prices are going up, consumers are getting skittish. We're still spending, but we're getting skittish, and we're feeling it. And we can talk about PPI and CPI and all that stuff in a minute. But here's what's driving the stock market, 2 things primarily. Artificial intelligence spending to the tune of hundreds of billions of dollars. And then, as we saw last Friday with the jobs market, 115,000 new jobs, not great, not terrible, but definitely solid. So if you look at those 2 sort of macro factors, the stock market says, you know what, things are going to be okay. And let's remember what the stock market is, right? It's just a bet on future performance of these companies, specifically now very big companies spending on AI, and then consumer goods companies who are boosted by consumers still spending because we still have a solid labor market.
You brought up AI. That leads me to a report that you had last week that really got me thinking, listening to your show. It was on the April productivity numbers. Yeah. And as you said, jobs and inflation numbers make the headlines much more than productivity. People don't even know what that means. But you got me wondering when productivity can be a bad thing. Let's say AI at some company can replace 100 people's jobs, but the company can keep making the same amount of product with fewer workers. That might increase productivity, the cost to the company to make each item. But it seems like a bad thing in human terms, less work for people. So can you explain what we measure when we measure productivity?
Yeah, in the most basic sense, worker productivity is widgets produced per hour work, whatever your widgets are, right? Yours and mine are putting a program on the radio with our production staff. Somebody else's is making cars, right? So that's the fundamental definition that we're looking at. The catch with artificial intelligence, as it was with the internet and as it was with the printing press and all other technological innovations, is that we have not yet figured out what and how AI is going to do to the U.S. Labor market productivity. So there are going to be fewer jobs, right? And we are going to have to figure out how to do that. I don't know what the answer is. The answer is very far away because we're so early in AI. But what's going to happen is that AI is going to replace some jobs. Other jobs will be created because of AI. And I'm not just talking about construction of data centers and computers and all the hardware and stuff, right? That's real spending and those are real jobs. But there are skills-based jobs that are going to be created after AI becomes a real thing. Let's remember actually that AI is still so new, right? It is still so very, very new for so many of us. And we just don't know yet what it's going to mean.
Yeah, well, that was actually going to be my next question, and maybe you already answered it, but maybe you have an additional thought, because I've been very aware of the competing projections about AI causing either mass economic doom and gloom on one extreme to the idea that every major technological advance in our history has produced more prosperity, not less. That's another point of view. Do you have a sense, through all your reporting on the range of uncertainties?
The range of uncertainty is enormous. ChatGPT came out, like 2 years ago? There are tens of millions. Yeah, there are tens of millions of people in this country who don't know what ChatGPT is yet. And so the challenge now is integrating that into, number one, our society, and then number two, into the labor force and our economy, and then figuring out where we go from there. Look, here's the problem, right? AI is, number one, it's a bubble now. Right? There's circular spending. There's investment being made with no certainty of payoff. There's no understanding of what it's going to mean for the labor force. And yet it is the future. The same way, by the way, that crypto will be the future of money. It's not yet. It's not until my 86-year-old mother can get down to the corner store and buy, her weekly ration of food or whatever with crypto. But we're not there yet. The same way we're not there with AI yet.
Wait, how is crypto? Explain this one to me, because this one I personally really don't get. How can crypto be the future of money compared to what we've always thought of as money, which is the government decides how much to print?
Yeah, well, so government is going to get into digital currencies, right? That's already happening in some countries, and the Federal Reserve is thinking about it. But money as a means of exchange and a store of value, it will eventually happen. We're just not there yet. And look, I know I keep saying we're early. Bitcoin's been around since 2008, 2009. That's not a very long period of time when you consider the history of money, right? The dollar has been around longer than America has been around. And we're still trying to figure out exactly, how we negotiate and deal with money. So the idea that after 25 years we've got crypto figured out that's just not reality.
We had yesterday's headline about inflation, or what you call before the CPI, Consumer Price Index, soaring by an annual rate of 3.8% last month. The Wall Street Journal used the word soaring in its headline. And one of the interesting things to me on your show last night was why inflation won't just disappear all of a sudden, even if the war would end tomorrow and the price of oil per barrel could come down quickly. Can you explain a little bit of that to our listeners?
Yeah, so first of all, let me pick up on that last thing you said. The price of oil per barrel is not going to come down quickly because, even the head of the IEA says it's going to take 2 years for the flow of oil out of the Gulf to normalize. So those who are thinking that if the Strait opens tomorrow, gas is going to be $2.50 again or whatever it was before the Strait closed, that's simply not going to happen, right? Futures prices now for Brent crude, I think December futures are like $102, which the market thinks that in December, as we sit here in May, oil is going to be $102 a barrel, right? So the market is betting on this taking a very long while. But on the inflation thing, and this was a story that Kristen Schwab did for us last night, we have had now, give or take, 6-ish years of persistently high and occasionally spiking inflation. We had the pandemic supply chain shocks. We had President Trump's tariff palooza of April the 2nd of last year. Now we've got the war, and we are in a period of sustained higher inflation. You saw the PPI this morning, the producer price index, right? That's prices at the wholesale level. They came in at 6% year on year. That is triple what people had been guessing. Now, the overlay between producer prices, wholesale prices, and consumer prices, retail prices, is not one-to-one. So that does not mean that consumer prices are going to be going up by 6%. But it does mean that there is more downstream inflation coming. So I think we all need to be ready for the fact that inflation is going to last for a while. And if I can channel outgoing Fed Chair Jay Powell here for a little minute or two, he's done on Friday, this idea that it is going to be transitory, I think, is not necessarily grounded in reality.
You know, and you just gave us, maybe inadvertently, another reason why I think Marketplace is such a valuable program. Just like I said with productivity before, most people don't think about that, but you were explaining that on your show. Well, even with the job I do, I was looking for that consumer price index yesterday morning, because I know that's the core measure of inflation that people talk about. So when that came out at 8:30, you know, I was on it. I had the channel on that would give me that information right away. The producer price index, which is, I guess, just as influential and came out this morning, I had no idea. And probably most of our listeners had no idea. So it's your job to explain what producer price index means compared to consumer price index and why we should care, right?
Yeah, that is my job. And look, let's talk about what let me toot my own horn for a minute. Marketplace exists so that people can understand the forces that shape their lives. The economy is in everything, right? And headlines are all well and good. But if you don't understand what's going on in your day to day, then it doesn't matter that the producer price index was 6% year on year. You know, the headlines just don't matter. It's all about what is happening. I spoke to a woman yesterday on our program, April Hemmis. She's a corn and soybean farmer in Iowa. We've been talking for, 10 years, me and April. And
I love that segment, by the way. I thought, for people in Brooklyn who've never grown a soybean, you made it really relatable and why it matters to them. But go ahead.
So the last part of that interview for me was the most interesting part, right? She had some really interesting things to say about China and trade and what the agricultural community is looking for out of President Trump's trip. But the other part of what's going on out there that honestly isn't getting a lot of coverage on the coast, if I could do that whole flyover country metaphor thing, is the farm economy is in crisis, right? Farm bankruptcies are up 44% over last year. April knows friends who are just like, you know what? I can't do this anymore. I'm losing money. I'm losing my farm. I have to find another way to do this. So there are slices of this economy that we at Marketplace have the great luxury of taking the time to explain and make people understand the economic forces that shape their lives.
So my last question gets at that, and that is, can you say anything, even beyond what you just said, about producing Marketplace as a public radio show? People can get the Dow, the S&P, lots of places, commercial chatter about the economy. So what's the heart of the public radio mission of your show as you see it when deciding how to be different?
A super quick story. When we used to get the Sunday New York Times hard copy delivered on the doorstep, I know a lot of people still do, most people don't. I would go and I would get it and I would read the front page, the editorial page, the sports, and then the wedding section, because the wedding section on the Sunday New York Times is always amazing, right? And then I would eventually turn late in the day to the business pages. Here's why I tell that story. What happens in those business pages, and metaphorically what Marketplace does, is that we find you the stories that you would ordinarily miss. We make them human. We do casual conversations. We have unexpected anecdotes. And that's why people need to listen to. I know you guys are in pledge, so let me make the pledge right now, right? If I came on the radio every day and said, leading economic indicators are up 4.2%, my mother would turn off the radio. And my mother listens every single day. I'm the only 62-year-old man in America whose mother knows where he is every single day, right? That's not what we do. We make you care and we make you understand. Public radio does that broadly. Marketplace does it for a very specific slice of what is happening in this country.
Have you ever had the experience where you were off the show one day for whatever reason and your mother called you up and said, are you okay?
It happened. Brian, it's been happening for 25 years. I kid you not. I have to email my mother. Every time I'm going to be off the air.
You and me. Kai Ryssdal hosts Marketplace 6:30 weeknights on WNYC and around the country. Kai, thanks for getting up early in LA and giving us a few minutes. Really enjoyed it.
Happy to do it.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Joining us now is Manoush Zomorodi. You may know her in her role as host of NPR's TED Radio Hour or her books, Bored and Brilliant and Spark. And maybe some of you might remember that not too long ago, Manoush was working right here in the WNYC newsroom. Well, since she's joined the NPR mothership, she's become a leading expert in how technology changes us as people. Mostly, we all talk about tech's impact on our brains these days, right? And we will now too. But Manoush's new book focuses on technology's impact on our bodies, and it includes this massive experiment she undertook with like 20,000 NPR listeners and advice for us all that came out of it. Let's check it out. Manoush Zomorodi's new book is called Body Electric: The Hidden Health Costs of the Digital Age and the New Science to Reclaim Your Well-Being. And she joins us now. Hey, Manoush, welcome back to WNYC.
Oh, hi, Brian. It's so nice to be back. Great to hear your voice.
And you used the phrase, the mind-body-tech connection. We're going to open up the phones, listeners, for your stories and questions about this. But let's set some of the basics. The mind-body-tech connection to describe your beat. And it's the intersection of how our devices are reshaping us physically, not just psychologically. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Yes, and I will start with a very personal example. So I was feeling like I would spend all day working on my laptop, checking my phone, all the rest of it, and I would close my laptop at the end of the day and feel like I had just enough energy left to kind of crawl across the floor, Brian, onto my couch to scroll on my phone, maybe watch some Netflix. But that was kind of it. There was this sense of feeling completely depleted. My eyes hurt. I could barely think. I was so foggy and just felt exhausted. And everyone I talked to was like, oh, yeah, I feel pretty crappy myself. And so as much as we have heard about the mental health effects of too much time online or social media, this felt so physical to me. And I just wanted to understand what was going on in my body that was making me feel so drained. So while I was sort of wondering about that, I happened to hear about a study that had been done at Columbia University Medical Center by a physiologist named Keith Diaz. So Keith's goal is to figure out the least amount of movement that the human body needs so that all the sitting we do doesn't kill us, because as we've all heard, sitting is the new smoking, or not so new anymore. And what Keith had found in his lab was that 5 minutes of gentle movement, walking 2 miles per hour for every half hour of sedentary time, had these outsized effects. It slashed people's glucose levels, their blood pressure. It made them able to focus again. And so when I heard that formula, I was like, why aren't we all doing this? This could be the answer. So I went to see Keith and I joined his study, and my glucose was indeed cut in half. My blood pressure dropped by 5 points, and I felt like I got my concentration back. And my sort of joy, like the day that I took the movement breaks, I had enough energy to come home and, hang out with my kids and run around with the dog in the backyard. It just felt like it was a huge shift for me. But Keith was doubtful, Brian, that anyone could take these breaks. So we ended up combining forces, NPR and Columbia, to do a global clinical trial. We had over 20,000 people sign up to take these breaks either every half hour, every hour, or every 2 hours. And it was quite extraordinary. Of the people who committed to it, 80% were able to stick with it. 80% actually liked taking these breaks. Their fatigue dropped by up to 28%. And maybe most surprisingly, their productivity rose slightly. So all those interruptions actually made them work more efficiently. They rated the quality of their work better. So to me, this feels like something we need to be talking about more, that our bodies are part of how we interact with our technology. And this could be the way that we feel like we get our focus back, like we can concentrate again, that we feel a little bit more positive.
So listeners, does this sound like you? We have a little time to open up the phones for you, for your stories or questions. For Manoush Zomorodi, who many of you know her from the TED Radio Hour. here on the station, and she's now the author of the book, Body Electric, The Hidden Health Costs of the Digital Age and New Science to Reclaim Your Well-Being. Anybody listening who happened to be among the 20,000 people who participated in that experiment, or anyone else with a story, a comment, or a question, 212-433 WNYC. And maybe some of you have seen previous coverage of that Columbia University Professor Diaz conclusion and have already been trying to take walking breaks, movement breaks during your day if you have a relatively sedentary job or otherwise sedentary life. Have you given it a try? Have there been challenges or obstacles or rewards that you've been able to notice, like Manoush was on her own physical well-being? 212-433 WNYC, 212-433-9692. You can call or you can text. I noticed that you push back on something that a lot of people might consider the solution and have gone to, and that's standing desks. You write that nearly 230 years of faith in standing desks appears to be misplaced. I thought standing desks came in like 2016. But tell us this story.
Yeah, people have been calling on standing desks for truly centuries. And unfortunately, we have just sort of gotten the data in. There was a study that looked at multiple studies and found that if you stand for over 2 hours a day, you actually increase your risk of cardiovascular issues, including varicose veins. And the reason is because even when you're standing, you are still. You are not stimulating your muscles. And as Keith explained to me, you need muscle stimulation because our leg muscles are like sponges, and to wet those sponges, to get them to suck out the glucose and the lipids from our bloodstream, they need stimulation. That also is what pushes oxygen up to our brain. And so if you're sitting for a long time, or standing, that stillness won't get you that sort of stimulation that you need. But, if your standing desk is an impetus to movement, then by all means, go ahead and use it. And I have other bad news, Brian, which is that even if you work out in the morning, if you then sit for the rest of the day, you also face some of the harms, which, add them all up. All that sitting over weeks, months, years, they can really increase your risk of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. 3 out of 4 Americans now have one of those chronic illnesses. Many of those are preventable.
How about working out in the afternoon? This is a totally selfish question because that's what I do, but probably a lot of people do. Work out after the workday. Is that any better or any different? Because you cited specifically morning.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, no, the bad news is don't stop working out though, Brian. I mean, it's great for your muscle capacity, your cardiovascular capacity, all of those things. But the thing that we need is the interstitial movement. The human body needs interruptions from all that sitting. So that's the sort of key. And you can't just check it off your list for the day and then be done, unfortunately. It's those little movements that continue to oxygenate our brain, to move the glucose through our body, to sort of keep us humming. We're driving ourselves like we are machines, like you can just plug us in once a day. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Despite all the efficiencies that we get from our technology, we are not machines. We need to introduce movement back into our lives. And that's what I did in the book was I went through the 20,000 people. How did they do this? How did they create a culture shift, whether it was in the office? Because we always think sitting and looking at a screen, that's what productivity looks like. Actually, no. How do we start to get people to stand up in the middle of a movement and walk around and people not think they're completely crazy? Or retired people who maybe move more during the day, but then end up sitting, 6, 7, 8 hours in the evenings, as I heard from them. And then, of course, in schools where, here in New York State, recess is not a law. How do teachers start to integrate movement into kids' day? Because it's been shown to improve their ability to learn.
So 5 minutes every half hour. of movement of some kind, walking at a pace of 2 miles an hour, which is quite slow. To break it up, that's the ideal that the experiment discovered. And Jennifer in South Orange is calling in as somebody who was in that sample, and I think has an interesting experience from being part of that experiment group. Jennifer, you're on WNYC with Manoush. Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. So it was one of my favorite segments that I ever heard on WNYC. And I love this expression, integrative exercise. And my husband and I, whenever we're at the airport, we'll always be doing squats and embarrassing our kids. We're doing integrative exercise. So when I heard the segment, I was so excited. I joined the clinical trial. When the family came home, I said, guess what? I joined the clinical trial. And I really was getting up every 30 minutes. I was walking about 5 minutes. I figured out exactly where I had to walk and then it just got kind of onerous tracking stuff, but and I felt really bad and I did drop out, but it's just remains with me. I think about it all the time. And as I was telling the screener, I was just doing a little yoga at my desk in between administrative tasks. So I really think it's one of the best things I've ever heard on WNYC.
Wait, Manoush, that's your dog, not Jennifer's dog, right?
No, that was Jennifer's dog.
Oh, Jennifer, your dog heard you say you dropped out of the study, and the dog couldn't handle it. Jen, what are you doing?
They also love when I take them out into the yard. And I'm actually a child psychiatrist, and I have my office in my house. I have the best commute in New Jersey. And in between patients, I'll take them up into the yard and do some squats with them. And I'm always thinking about the WNYC story. And that's why I'm a sustaining member.
Thank you very much. And there's motivation for taking multiple walks a day. Have a dog. But what were you thinking listening to Jennifer, Manoush?
Well, I was thinking, she said she dropped out, but actually that's a win because we found that on average, people didn't take, 5 minutes every half hour. They actually, and that's a lot, right? What we found that was most feasible was 5 minutes every hour and even just 4 to 5 5-minute movement breaks. And those people, they saw the same sort of mood rise, ability to focus, energy, positivity. I think, for people who have chronic illnesses, the gold standard is this 5 minutes per half hour if you want the glucose benefits. But even just 1 minute every hour has an effect on blood pressure. So honestly, I think what we're talking about is a life change, a different approach to exercise, thinking about the human body as needing movement throughout the day and also showing ourselves some grace, right? Okay, so maybe this hour didn't work out. That's fine. You have a whole lifetime ahead of you that you want to integrate movement into your life and feel better. And I think, you're in the news business, Brian. It's rough out there. We could all use a little boost of productivity and positivity and joy. And it's just pretty simple and it's free.
Here are 2 alternative forms of movement besides just the walking that people are chiming in with. Pretty interesting. One listener writes, when I was working, it says, I recommend folks to dance for a few minutes every hour because it will exercise your muscles and your mind from the music. Enjoyment. I have overcome my knee arthritis by taking on regular dancing breaks. So that's one. I'm going to take another one on the phones, and then you can respond to both. Here's Desmond in Ohio. You're on WNYC. Hi, Desmond. Desmond, are you there? I know it's a long way to Ohio, but I don't think the delay is that long. Desmond once, Desmond twice. Do I have the wrong name? All right. Well, what I have here is that Desmond said he started using a walking pad when working from home. And, people have seen those, right? It's like a little treadmill in a way that you can have right at your standing desk. So it's the standing desk, but you're walking, you're moving at the same time. Did you look into those, Manoush?
Totally. So some people love to get gear, right? And they find that if they have the right gear, it changes everything. I know people who take all their calls on their walking pads. Personally, I'm not a fan of gear. I always break it. So I do the Zoom and Shuffle is my fave. I also take as many calls as possible. While I'm walking, I'll say, "Can we not do a Zoom? Can I just call you so I can walk while I talk to you?" Dance parties, great idea. We have a Spotify playlist of songs that are 5 minutes approximately that you can rock out to. Absolutely turn your kitchen into a dance floor. We also had people who vacuumed during their 5 minutes or collected all the dirty dishes or the dirty laundry around the house for their 5 minutes. Other people who just love to get outside. We saw people who got out in nature, not surprisingly, had a bit of a boost. And the number one way that people manage to remember to take their breaks is no surprise, Brian. They would set a timer, right? Intentionally set a timer to remind themselves. But what we found was that by the end of the 2 weeks, they kind of didn't need the timer. Their body started responding and telling them when it needed a break. And this is something called interoception. That's a relatively new area of research. And this is how the body tells the mind what it needs. And there are some new research showing that our interoception gets sort of quieted down. The volume gets turned down when we're on screens because we're so captivated about what's going on our screen. We don't hear that our body says, "Hey, your back hurts. You're getting anxious. You need a break. You need a snack." But when people started taking these breaks, that sort of conversation started to be a little louder again between the body and the mind and the technology.
We have 2 minutes left in the segment. I want to tell the listeners that we focus the conversation, because when we do book interviews, the way that we approach them isn't necessarily, we're going to go chapter by chapter and do a summary of the book. That might be good in high school. But what we often do is pick out an aspect of the book that we think would be a good conversation for us all to have and focus on that. So we've done that with the part of Manoush's book that's about the experiment that she did with 20,000 NPR listeners on screen time and movement. Part 2 of the book, just briefly, expands the argument beyond just sitting and walking. You devote chapters, I see, to what screens are doing to our eyes, our ears, our posture, and our breathing. You want to pick one for just a quick sample? Maybe the nearsightedness one is interesting?
Yeah,
or
totally.
Pick one of your choice.
Oh, let's do eyes. So yes, I tried to do sort of top to tail. That's the the goal. But eyes are fascinating. So I talked to a woman ophthalmologist named Maria Liu, who works in Berkeley, who is studying why kids are going nearsighted at so much earlier ages and at higher rates. And one of the reasons is that actually it's the behavior, right? People used to think you went nearsighted because your parents were nearsighted. It was genetic. But she showed in her lab that actually the eyeball will change shape depending on what you ask it to do. So if you say, "I want you to look at a screen for hours and hours and hours and see things really clearly," the eyeball will say, "You got it," and it'll become sort of egg-shaped so it can focus really closely. But that means that you aren't able to look into the distance anymore. And so we've heard take eye breaks to rest your eyes. But she says, actually, you need to get outside for eyeball breaks so that you can look into the horizon and sort of give your eyeballs the signal that I need you to see in the distance and continue to do so. With kids getting outside less and spending more time on screens, this becomes even more important.
All right. With tips for your eyeballs delivered through your earballs, Manoush Zomorodi, the host of NPR's TED Radio Hour and author of the new book, Body Electric, The Hidden Health Cost of the Digital Age and New Science to Reclaim Your Well-Being. Great to talk to you, Manoush. Really interesting stuff. Thank you so much.
Lovely to be back, Brian. Thanks for having me.
Brian Lehrer on WNYC. Once a month for a year on the show, we're taking some time to pay attention to one of the most important, if often overlooked, parts of New York City and surrounding areas, the parts that are not man-made, the plants and animals that sustain us. Last month, we talked about the spring migration of wildlife via our local waterways. Think eels, horseshoe crabs, and other aquatic life forms that we talked about last month. Today, we'll look up at the sky. From March to June, New York City's airspace belongs to all sorts of insects and birds traveling north, as you certainly know. With me now to tell us more about these critters, though, where to spot them and how to keep them safe, is Marielle Anzalone, urban botanist and ecologist and the founder of New York City Wildflower Week, and Christian Cooper, science and comics writer, host of the National Geographic TV series Extraordinary Birder, New York City Bird Alliance board member, and author of the 2023 book, Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World. Hey, Christian. Hi, Marielle. Thanks for doing this with us.
Hi, Brian. Glad to be here.
Good morning.
Marielle, we tend to think of habitat as something on the ground, I think. But the sky over New York is also a habitat, at least for a few months a year. Who's using the sky right now, and where are they headed?
Oh my gosh, so many different kinds of wildlife. So it's really incredible to think about. You think about New York City right on the ground, you walk in, you see something. But the Atlantic Flyway actually connects New York City to the larger planet. Species come in from southern parts of the globe and fly over New York City, and they come and rest. So our natural areas are important spaces for them to take respite. But we have birds, we have bats, we have butterflies, we even have dragonflies that come over New York City, and the migrations have been happening, so interesting, for thousands of years. So this is something that everyone should be paying attention to.
Christian, let's zoom in on your specialty. The birds, where are these migrants coming from? Are they mostly more or less from the same place? And what's New York's role in their journey?
No, they're coming from all over, from the southern part of the world, as Marielle mentioned. Some may be coming from Florida or may have wintered on the Gulf Coast. Some are coming from Mexico. Some are coming from the Caribbean. Some are coming from South America, from as far south as Argentina. So these birds are they've spent the winter in various places, which are just as much home to them as their breeding grounds up north, which we think of as their home. But then, the days get longer and they start getting an itch to move, and they migrate when they get the good winds, and they fly up the coast, as Marielle said, up the Atlantic Flyway for us, and run smack into New York City. And they need to rest, they need to refuel, and we get the benefit of getting to see them before they move on to parts further north, or a few of them stick around and breed here.
Do you have a favorite species or two? I don't know if that's like asking, which is your favorite child to ask a birder. Do you have a favorite species or two? But any that you want to shout out that people might look or listen for?
I do. There are these birds in the east in particular called warblers. They are small insectivores, very active. I think of them as butterflies with personality. And in the east, we get some 30, 35 different species of warblers that you could possibly see. And so when they arrive, we get all excited. That's how we index our spring as birders, is by how many warblers, different varieties of warblers we get. And there's one in particular called the Blackburnian warbler, which has a day-glow fiery orange throat. So when he arrives in the male, it's a bright orange throat. So when he arrives, I get super excited, and I can't get enough of him. I did not see one this morning, unfortunately, but I did yesterday.
Do you do bird calls, by the way? I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you do, can you do a warbler?
Most of the warblers have very high-pitched voices, so it's very hard for a human voice to imitate them. But there's one called the hooded warbler, which has a clear whistled song. So if my whistling is, I haven't tried to whistle today, but I'll give it a try. That's a hooded warbler song.
How about you, Marielle? Have any favorites that people should watch for or listen for?
Oh, for birds? Gosh, you know what, Brian? I feel like there are a lot of people that love birds. I try to keep, I look up every once in a while, but I'm mostly looking at wildflowers on the ground, believe it or not. But One bird that I saw once that was really beautiful was a northern parula, which I'm sure Chris knows more about, but it was really beautiful. But I think one of the things that's so interesting is just how many birds come through New York City, and that it's such an exciting part of city life that more people should be paying attention to.
There are
Christian,
so many.
go
No, I was
ahead.
just going to say there are so many birders who, just got started with the pandemic, and they come up to us to reinforce what Mariel just said, and they come up to us old timers, and they're like, "I had no idea this was happening under my nose all the time, and it's amazing and it's wonderful. And what have I missed?" And I'm like, "Welcome to the club."
Listeners, anybody have a question about spring migrations, the airborne edition this time? 212-433 WNYC. This can be a tip if you have like a favorite birding spot or a butterfly story. We haven't even talked about the butterflies yet. Or you found a bird that hit your window. Call or text us at 212-433 WNYC, or just ask Christian or Marielle a question. 212-433 9692 as we continue this once a month series that we're doing for a year. What are we up to, Marielle? Is this month 3? I think we did flowers, and then the waterborne migration, and
Yes.
now the airborne migration, right?
Yes, yes. So we talked, the first month was about kind of like timing of phenology. So it was the way that the natural world kind of keeps record of a calendar. It's a calendar, that you'd see outside your window. And so really spring migration is further sort of marker of phenology, right? And so Christian, of course, knows really well. This is how he keeps track of his calendar when the birds are coming through. And so the birds have this kind of internal clock by which they know, okay, it's time for me to get a move on. Yeah, so and now, we're just thinking about what else is in the skies. Birds are so well known and beloved, as they should be. But there are other creatures that use the skies. Bats are one that we don't really think about. And people may find them creepy, but in fact, bats are so important with regard to keeping insect populations down and being in partnership with local farmers, so that they don't have to use as many pesticides on their crops. And then in spring, one of the butterflies that I really love to see is the red admiral. That is a springtime migrant. We think about monarchs as being migratory, and you see numbers of them in the fall. Now, this time of year, the monarchs are kind of singularly going through their generations northward. But the ones that you see in big numbers for spring are red admirals. They're really pretty. It's a dark butterfly with red-orange bands, and you'll see them in large numbers as they migrate north from warmer regions.
For people who may think of a butterfly different from a bird as something that just kind of flutters around, in a small area, how far do butterflies migrate?
Oh gosh, well, it depends on the species, but I think one of the migratory routes that people know well, and they're really iconic, are monarch butterflies. And of course, monarchs overwinter in central Mexico in very high altitude mountain range. And they all overwinter there. But then as they travel northward, they have 3 separate routes through which they travel in the United States. One is far west through California, one is sort of in the Midwestern US, and then there's us, which is the Atlantic Flyway over, the far east.
Holly in Rockland County, you're on WNYC. Hi, Holly.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. I live in Rockland County, and we're very fortunate. We get a lot of beautiful birds, but we have a lot of glass. We have very big glass windows, and I often get birds kind of smashing into the glass. I don't know if there's anything that can be done to minimize that or prevent that.
Christian, do you know?
There's absolutely something you can do to minimize that or prevent that. You can put some decals on the glass. Frequently, you'll see people put up silhouettes of hawks and other raptors in flight, because that's like a danger signal to the birds. It's like putting up warning. And so that will alert them to the fact that there's glass there. But even less intrusive, there are ways to put up, sort of either marks yourself or a clear vinyl applique to the glass with just sort of a slight dot pattern that's almost imperceptible to the human eye, but the birds see it, absolutely. And now they're even manufacturing bird-safe glass, which is designed with that in mind, so that they have an element that the birds can see, but we humans barely notice, if at all. And so that will cut way, way down on your collisions.
Are there so many bird deaths in their migrations in the New York area? Because I've seen New York described as a sink for migratory birds, meaning more birds die here than a lot of other places because more fly through than the city's role as a stopover can sustain. Is that because of a lot of tall glass buildings, or is that for some other reason?
There's a couple of reasons. Part of it is light, and part of it is the glass. Those are the two main things that make our city particularly dangerous with the tall buildings. And there's actually legislation in the works to deal with the lights, and legislation we've already passed in the city to help make the glass less of a problem. Again, requiring the use of bird-safe glass in new construction in the city. So that's great. But those are the two big elements. And one thing, just as an example, in the fall, when 9/11 comes around and there's that tribute in light with the two beautiful towers of light, almost a ghostly image of what we lost and of who we lost shining up into the sky. But what people don't realize is that 9/11 happened right smack in the middle of the peak of the fall migration when the birds are heading back down south. And so every year when those lights go up, those lights disrupt the birds, many of whom migrate at night, and they get trapped in those beams of light. They get confused, and many of them end up dying in that process. So actually, New York City Bird Alliance worked with the Tribute and Light people, and they have counters who go there and watch the lights, volunteer counters who spend all night watching when the Tribute of Light is lit up, and then when the birds reach a certain concentration, the lights get switched off just long enough for the birds to disperse so that they aren't killed by that light source. But lights and glass are the big problems.
Interesting. I think Joan in Manhattan has a question that probably a lot of people are wondering about. Joan, you're on WNYC. Hi.
Yeah, hi. I was wondering, is there an ideal temperature range for birds to live in? I always heard that birds fly south in the winter, and I said, oh, sure, it gets so cold here. It never occurred to me that they have to keep flying south because when it gets warm, they come back up north. So what triggers them coming back up north? And is global warming having any effect on the birds? Is it confusing them in any way?
Thank you, John. Christian, that one's for you, too.
There are so many elements to that question, so I'll try to be concise. First of all, the most important thing to remember is that birds migrate because of food supply. It's not because of cold. Indirectly, it's because the cold affects their food supply. But if they have a food source, the birds can actually make it. Because remember, they've got feathers, and the primary role of feathers is not flying, but as a down coat to keep them warm. So there are plenty of birds that winter over, and so it's really about food supply. What triggers them to know they have to leave, because remember, they're down in the south, they don't know what the weather is up here, is the length of the days. And that really tells them, oh, it's time to go. And then, their hormones kick in and like, I gotta go. And they take off. And there was probably a third part to that question, but I can't remember what it was.
Well, I'll add a third part. Why don't they stay in New York? The snowbirds I know live in Florida in the winter, but they don't go to Canada. They don't just stop in New York and move on. Obviously, some go down from Canada. But is New York not a temperate enough climate for the birds for the whole summer?
It's not about climate. Again, it's not about the temperature. It's about the resources they need to raise the next generation.
I see.
And what these birds are doing is they are going to places where there is seasonal opportunity. So in the summertime, wherever they're going, there are the particular bugs and the particular habitat that they need to be able to raise their young successfully. And that's where they're headed. And it's an opportunity that's only their part of the year. And because birds have the ultimate mobility, they can fly, they can go any place in the world, that gives them the ability, when that resource is not available, to go someplace else. And that's how migration happens.
some texts that are coming in. One says, please tell fellow listeners that there's a petition for New York State to require all new buildings to use bird safe glass. So since that came up before, that's a good thing to pass along for those of you who are interested. Another listener writes, a good place to look for birds. We always look in the sky around mile marker 104 on I-87. So that would be the New York State Thruway. And mile marker 104, if it starts at the Bronx-Westchester line, I guess that would be a little north of New Paltz, around Kingston, I guess. So mile marker 104, they do have those mile markers on the side of the road if you're driving the Thruway. And the listener writes, there is a bald eagle nest somewhere around there, and we see a bald eagle around 45% of the time. Want to get one more thing in for you, Marielle, because I see that bats are also in this category. And a lot of bats also die. Should people be concerned about there not being too many bats?
Well, with bats, yes. So there is something that's called white nose syndrome, which has turned out to be this kind of fungal infection that bats get. And it's that it disturbs them while they are overwintering. While they're hibernating, it kind of wakes them up. And so they don't have enough kind of fat resources to survive through hibernation. It disturbs their numbers. They end up, lowers their numbers. The problem with that is that, like I mentioned earlier, farmers work in concert with bats. Bats do so many things for us, these kinds of ecosystem services that we don't have any way to measure and think about economically. But bats take care of insect populations for farmers for free. When bat numbers plummet, as they have in New York State, farmers use more pesticides. And in fact, there's a study that shows that this increase in pesticide use by farmers has a negative effect on human mortality, so that these pesticides get into the environment and are, consumed in some way by people, maybe through drinking water. I don't remember off the top of my head, but and it affects insect birth rates, human infant birth rates. So These things have a direct effect on our health and well-being. So it's something that we really need to be thinking about, but we don't.
All right, listeners, we're continuing this once a month for a year on the show. This was episode 3, taking some time to pay attention to the not man-made aspects, the plants and the animals that sustain us in greater New York. Marielle Anzalone will keep coming on with us and keep bringing interesting guests along with her. Like for this month, it has been Christian Cooper, who is the host of the National Geographic TV series Extraordinary Birder, New York City Bird Alliance board member, and the author of the 2023 book, Better Living Through Birding, Notes from a Black Man in the Natural World. Thank you both. This was great.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Brian Lehrer Weekend. We're back on the radio Monday morning at 10 a.m. In the meantime, follow us on Blue Sky at The Brian Lehrer Show, where there's always a conversation 24/7.